She watched the shadow creature tear through 3 armed men in seconds. Blood pooled on the library floor. And standing in the center of it all, bleeding, dying, was the most dangerous man in Seoul. A man whose name made grown criminals weep. But she didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she whispered an ancient word she'd read in a forbidden book, and everything changed. What happened next would shatter 2 worlds, break every rule, and lead to the most forbidden love story you've never heard. But here's what nobody could predict: the creature? It was just the beginning. Listen, I know life gets heavy. The world feels crazy sometimes, and you just need an escape. A story that reminds you that reality is stranger and more beautiful than anything you imagined. That's what this is. But before we dive in, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me what country you're watching from, because this community is worldwide and I read every single one. Trust me, you'll want to watch until the very end, because what I'm about to reveal will shake everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the darkness that lives between worlds. Don't skip ahead. Every minute matters. Now, let's begin. Her name was Imani Thompson, 32 years old. A black woman from Detroit who moved to Seoul to escape her past and lose herself in books. Quiet. Invisible. Safe. His name was Park Jin-woo, 41 years old. 3rd-generation Korean Mafia. A man who controlled half of Seoul's underground. Ruthless. Untouchable. Feared. 2 people who should have never met. 2 worlds that should have never collided. But on October 17, 2019, something ancient and evil was unleashed in that library. And these are the questions you need answered. What was the creature that hunted him? Why did she risk everything to save a killer? And what secret did she discover that would bind them together forever? By the end of this story, you'll question everything you believe about fate, redemption, and monsters. To understand why Imani Thompson saved a mafia boss, you need to understand what she was running from. Born in Detroit, 1987. Brilliant mind. Graduated top of her class in library science and comparative mythology. But Imani had a gift or a curse, depending on who you ask. She could see things. Shadows that moved wrong. Whispers in languages that shouldn't exist. Her grandmother called it the sight. Her mother called it a mental breakdown. At 29, after a traumatic incident she never spoke about publicly, Imani made a choice: disappear. Seoul, South Korea. Far enough from home that the shadows couldn't follow. Or so she thought. She took a job at the Yongsan International Library, night shift, naturally. Rare books. Ancient texts. The kind of place where nobody asks questions. For 3 years, she was invisible. Perfect. Alone. Exactly what she wanted. But some people aren't meant to stay invisible. Park Jin-woo didn't choose this life. It chose him. Born into the Biko clan, one of Seoul's oldest and most feared organized crime families. His grandfather built an empire. His father expanded it. Jin-woo? He was supposed to be different. Studied law at Seoul National University. Had dreams of going legitimate. But when his older brother was murdered by a rival gang in 2008, everything changed. He took over at 30. And he was brutal. Efficient. Within 5 years, he'd eliminated 3 rival organizations. They called him the Ghost because by the time you saw him, you were already dead. But Jin-woo had enemies. Not just rival gangs. Not just police. Something else was hunting him. Something that had waited generations for revenge. And it was about to find him in the last place he'd ever expect. October 17, 2019. 11:47 p.m. Imani was alone in the rare books section when she felt it. That familiar cold. The one that meant something was wrong. She'd learned to trust that feeling. But this time, this was different. This was old. Angry. Hunting. At 11:52 p.m., the library's back door shattered. Park Jin-woo burst through, bleeding from his shoulder. Behind him, 3 of his men, trained killers, were desperately trying to fight something Imani couldn't quite see in the shadows. Jinwoo's eyes locked with Imani's, and in that split second, she saw something she didn't expect. Terror. Pure, human terror. The creature emerged into the light, and Imani's blood ran cold. It wasn't human. Wasn't even close. 8 feet tall. Limbs that bent wrong. Eyes that burned like coals. And it spoke in a language Imani recognized from the ancient texts she'd been studying. Old Korean. But older than Old Korean. Something forbidden. The creature killed Jinwoo's men in seconds. Literally ripped them apart. And then it turned to him. Jinwoo raised his gun. Emptied the clip. Every bullet passed straight through. And the creature laughed. That's when Imani did something crazy. Something she'd sworn she'd never do again. She spoke back. Words her grandmother taught her. Words from a book that shouldn't exist. A binding spell written in 3 dead languages. The creature screamed. And then, it disappeared. But here's the twist that changed everything. The spell didn't banish the creature. It bound it. To Jinwoo. To Imani. To both of them. And binding spells? They have rules. Consequences. The kind that last forever. Okay, I need to know, are you still following this? Because it gets even crazier. Drop a comment right now with "I'm still here" or tell me what you think is going to happen next. Let's see who's really watching. Because what comes next? Nobody could have predicted. When the dust settled, Jinwoo's remaining guards arrived. They found their boss alive, 3 men dead, and a librarian standing over ancient texts covered in blood. Jinwoo raised his hand. Stopped them from shooting her. One word, no. Because he felt it too. The connection. Like a chain wrapped around both their souls. Imani tried to explain. The creature was a Guishan, a vengeful spirit from Korean folklore. But not just any Guishan. This one was ancient. Summoned by someone who knew Jinwoo's family history. 70 years ago, Jinwoo's grandfather betrayed a shaman clan. Stole sacred artifacts. The clan cursed his bloodline. 3 generations of hunting. And Jinwoo was the last. The binding spell Imani used? It created a tether. Between her, Jinwoo, and the creature. Here's how it worked. The creature couldn't kill Jinwoo without killing Imani first. And it couldn't kill Imani without breaking the spell, which would free Jinwoo forever. Stalemate. But only temporary. Because binding spells decay. And when this one broke, in approximately 6 months, the creature would be free to finish what it started. 6 months to find a way to break the curse permanently. 6 months where Imani and Jinwoo couldn't be more than 500 feet apart without excruciating pain. Try explaining that to your Mafia organization. Imani moved into Jinwoo's penthouse that night. Not romance. Survival. She got the guest room. Armed guards outside her door. Trust? 0. But they had to work together. Had to research the curse. Had to find the descendants of the shaman clan. And slowly, painfully slowly, they started to see each other as human. Jinwoo learned that Imani wasn't some mystical savior. She was scared. Traumatized. Running from her own demons. And Imani learned that Jinwoo wasn't just a killer. He was trapped. A man who'd given up everything for family honor. A man who'd never had a choice. But they weren't the only ones investigating. The creature was getting stronger. Every night, it tested the binding. Every night, it got closer. And Jinwoo's enemies? They sensed weakness. Rival gangs started moving. The police started asking questions about the massacre at the library. The clock was ticking. 6 months was now 4. Then 3. They searched everywhere. Ancient temples. Black markets for mystical artifacts. Underground shamans who dealt in forbidden knowledge. Every lead took them deeper into Korea's hidden mystical world. A world that existed alongside the modern one. A world of secrets, blood debts, and ancient grudges. Jinwoo used his connections. His money. His reputation. But for the first time in his life, violence couldn't solve his problem. Imani dove into texts her grandmother had left her. Journals written in codes. Stories that had been passed down through generations of Black women who carried the site. And late at night, when the research got too heavy, they'd talk. Really talk. Jinwoo told her about his brother. The guilt he carried. The violence that hollowed him out. The man he wished he could have been. Imani told her about the trauma she ran from. The people she'd failed to save. The gift that felt like a curse. Somewhere between the research and the late-night confessions, something shifted. They stopped being captor and captive. Hunter and prey. Criminal and innocent. They became partners. And that's when they found the secret. The one that changed everything. Month 3. Imani discovered something in her grandmother's journal. Something that made her blood run cold. Her grandmother didn't just know about the site. She was part of the original shaman clan. The one Jinwoo's grandfather betrayed. Imani wasn't in Seoul by accident. She wasn't just a random librarian. Her bloodline was connected to this curse from the beginning. The creature wasn't hunting Jinwoo randomly. It was engineered to bring together the last descendants of both families. The oppressor and the oppressed. The killer and the mystic. Imani and Jinwoo were never strangers. They were destiny. But here's the part that broke them both. The curse could only be broken one way. One of them had to willingly sacrifice their life for the other. And they had 2 weeks to decide. Jinwoo immediately volunteered. Said he'd lived a violent life. Deserved this end. Tried to make arrangements. But Imani refused. Said she'd spent her whole life running from purpose. From connection. This was her chance to mean something. For the first time in their lives, both of them wanted to live. Wanted to choose someone else. Wanted each other. It happened on day 83. Jinwoo found Imani on the balcony at 3 a.m., crying. And he did something he'd never done. He sat beside her. Didn't speak. Just existed with her. She told him everything. The trauma she ran from. The people she'd failed to save. The guilt that ate at her. And he told her everything. The brother he couldn't protect. The violence that hollowed him out. The man he wished he could have been. Somewhere between confession and forgiveness, between the curse and the creature, between death and impossible hope. They fell in love. The most forbidden, impossible, doomed love story. Between a Black librarian and a Korean Mafia boss. Between two people who had 10 days left to live. But love doesn't care about curses. Or timing. Or logic. It just is. With 7 days left, Imani found something. One line in an ancient text that everyone had missed. When two bloodlines unite in true love, the curse consumes itself. Marriage. Not sacrifice. Not death. Union. But there was a catch. The marriage had to be recognized by both the living world and the spirit world. Legal ceremony wasn't enough. They needed a shaman. And the only living shaman who could perform the ritual? The granddaughter of the woman Jinwoo's grandfather betrayed. A woman who had every reason to let them both die. Her name was Seo Mi-sun. 67 years old. Living in Busan. When Jinwoo and Imani showed up at her door, she slammed it in their faces. But Imani didn't leave. She sat outside that door for 3 days. Explaining. Apologizing for sins that weren't hers. Begging for mercy her bloodline never showed. On day 3, the door opened. Mi-sun looked at Imani. Then at Jinwoo. And she said 5 words that changed everything. Your grandmother saved my mother. Turns out, the curse was never meant to end in death. It was meant to end in this. Reconciliation. The original shaman who created it, Imani's great-great-grandmother, designed it to force the bloodlines together. Not revenge. Evolution. The curse would haunt both families until someone from each side chose love over hate. Unity over division. Forgiveness over vengeance. Mi-sun had been waiting 40 years for this moment. For two people crazy enough, brave enough, and broken enough to choose love with 72 hours left to live. And she agreed to perform the ceremony. October 17, 2020. Exactly 1 year after the creature attacked. Exactly 3 days before the binding broke. No guests. No celebration. Just Imani, Jinwoo, Mi-sun, and 2 witnesses from Jinwoo's organization who'd become friends. Mi-sun spoke the words in 3 languages: Korean, Yoruba, and something ancient that predated both. And when Jinwoo kissed Imani, when their blood mixed on ceremonial cloth, when Mi-sun sealed the union, the creature appeared one final time. But it wasn't attacking. It was bowing. The curse broke. Not with violence. Not with death. With love. With choice. With 2 broken people becoming whole. And then it was over. Today, for years later, Imani and Jinwoo Park live in Seoul. Jinwoo left the Mafia. Used his resources to fund libraries and education programs, trying to pay back a debt he'll never fully repay. Imani runs a cultural center that preserves both Korean and African mystical traditions, teaching young people that our differences aren't curses, they're bridges. They have a daughter, 3 years old, named Mi-sun, after the woman who saved them, who believed in love when no one else did. The creature? Gone. But sometimes, Imani still feels it. Not as a threat. As a reminder that some curses are blessings in disguise. That the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. That love, real love, is the most powerful magic there is. So here's my question for you. Was this a curse or a gift? Was it destiny or choice? Was justice really served when Jinwoo walked away from his violent life, or should he have paid a harsher price? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm reading every single one. And I want to know, would you have spotted the red flags? Would you have taken the risk? If this story touched you, if it made you believe in second chances and impossible love, hit that like button right now. Send this to someone who needs to remember that redemption is real. That love can break any curse. That we're not defined by the sins of our ancestors. We're defined by what we choose to do next. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, unbelievable stories that remind you the world is stranger and more beautiful than you imagined, subscribe to this channel. Check out the other videos. Because this community, we're worldwide. We're truth seekers. And we're just getting started. What did you think happened that night in the library? What would you have done? Comment below. I'm here. I'm reading. And I can't wait to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious. Stay open. And remember, the best stories are the ones we never see coming.